Some storms rage outside your door, others tear through your soul. In the mountains of Colorado, where pine trees stand like sentinels against the sky, a man who thought he'd lost everything discovers that sometimes the thing you save saves you right back. When power corrupts absolutely, when billion-dollar empires treat children like property, when federal badges hide the faces of mercenaries, that's when ordinary people make extraordinary choices. Tonight, in the fury of nature's wrath, three lives will collide: a broken father seeking redemption, a desperate mother fighting an empire, and a little girl whose innocence will ignite a war against the untouchable. Because there are some lines you don't cross, some innocence you don't destroy, some fights worth dying for. The storm is coming, and when it breaks, the powerful will learn that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with money or connections. It's the one with nothing left to lose. The storm hammered the quiet mountain town of Pine Ridge like nature's own fury unleashed. Rain slashed sideways across the winding highway, turning the asphalt into a treacherous river of water and debris. Lightning split the black sky, illuminating the towering pines that gave the town its name before plunging everything back into darkness. Jake Morrison gripped the steering wheel of his battered Ford pickup, his weathered hands steady despite the chaos outside. At 45, he'd weathered his share of storms, both literal and metaphorical. The construction job in the next county had run late, and all he wanted was to get home to his small cabin, maybe heat up some leftover chili, and catch the late-night baseball highlights. "Come on, old girl," he muttered to his truck as the engine stuttered slightly. "Just get me home." The windshield wipers struggled against the deluge, creating a rhythmic squeak that filled the cab. Jake leaned forward, squinting through the blurry glass. The headlights barely penetrated the wall of rain ahead, but something caught his eye, a splash of color that didn't belong in the storm-darkened landscape. His heart lurched. There, huddled against a massive pine tree beside the road, was a small figure, a child. "Jesus Christ," Jake breathed, immediately pulling over. The truck's hazard lights began their frantic blinking as he threw open the door and stepped into the tempest. The rain hit him like ice-cold needles, soaking through his work shirt in seconds. He jogged toward the tree, his boots squelching in the muddy shoulder of the road. As he got closer, his chest tightened with a mix of concern and disbelief. It was a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing a thin pink dress that clung to her tiny frame. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull, and her lips had taken on a dangerous blue tint. She was shivering so violently that her whole body seemed to vibrate. "Hey there, sweetheart," Jake called out, crouching down to her level. He kept his voice gentle despite the urgency clawing at his throat. "What are you doing out here?" The child's eyes, huge, dark, and filled with terror, locked onto his face. She didn't speak, just stared at him with the kind of haunted expression that belonged on war refugees. Not little girls in small American towns. Jake's protective instincts, honed by years of being a father himself, kicked into overdrive. He looked around desperately, hoping to see a car with its hazards on, frantic parents searching for their lost daughter. But there was nothing, just the storm and the darkness, and this impossibly vulnerable child. "Okay, sweetheart, we need to get you warm," he said, slowly extending his hand. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The girl hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached out with fingers so small and cold they felt like ice chips against his palm. Jake carefully lifted her into his arms. Shocked by how light she was, she buried her face against his chest, her tiny body racked with shivers. He carried her back to the truck, his mind racing. This wasn't right. Children didn't just appear alone in storms. Someone was looking for this kid. They had to be. As he settled her into the passenger seat, Jake cranked up the heat and grabbed an old flannel shirt from behind the seat. "Here you go, kiddo," he said, wrapping the oversized shirt around her like a blanket. "What's your name?" The girl clutched the fabric tightly, her dark eyes peering up at him. For a moment, Jake thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Emma." "Emma," Jake repeated, his heart breaking a little at how small and scared she sounded. "That's a pretty name. I'm Jake. Can you tell me where your mommy and daddy are?" Emma shook her head, and Jake saw tears mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. Jake pulled out his cell phone, but the screen showed no signal typical for this stretch of mountain highway during bad weather. He'd have to get her back to town, to the sheriff's office. But first, he needed to get her dry and warm. "All right, Emma," he said, putting the truck in gear. "Let's get you somewhere safe." As they drove through the storm toward Pine Ridge, Jake kept glancing at the little girl in his passenger seat. She'd stopped shivering quite so violently, but her eyes remained wide and watchful, as if she expected danger to come crashing through the windows at any moment. Jake Morrison had been a father once. His son David had been about Emma's age when the cancer took him 3 years ago. The loss had nearly destroyed Jake's marriage, and eventually, it did. Sarah had moved back to her family in California, unable to bear the memories that seemed to lurk in every corner of their small town. Now, looking at this frightened child, Jake felt something stir in his chest that he'd thought was buried with his son, the fierce, protective love that came with being someone's guardian, someone's safe harbor in the storm. "We're almost there, sweetheart," he said softly. "You're going to be okay." But even as he said it, a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that this was just the beginning, that finding Emma wasn't the end of the story, it was the start of something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple case of a lost child. The storm was far from over. Jake's cabin sat on 3 acres of pine and birch trees on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, a sanctuary he'd built with his own hands during better times. The porch light cast a warm glow through the rain as he pulled into the gravel driveway, the familiar sight of home bringing some measure of comfort. Emma had fallen asleep during the drive, her small body finally succumbing to exhaustion. Jake carefully lifted her from the truck, surprised again by how light she felt. She stirred slightly but didn't wake as he carried her up the wooden steps and through the front door. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable hand-hewn log walls, a stone fireplace, and furniture that Jake had made himself during the long, lonely evenings after David died. He laid Emma gently on the leather couch, then moved quickly to build a fire in the fireplace. As the flames caught and began to throw dancing shadows on the walls, Jake took a closer look at the child he'd rescued. Her dress, though soaked and muddy now, was clearly expensive silk or some other high-end fabric. Her small hands were soft, uncalloused, the hands of a child who'd never known hard work or want. This wasn't a runaway from the trailer parks on the wrong side of Pine Ridge. This was a child from money, from privilege, which made her presence on that storm-lashed highway even more mystifying. Jake found some of David's old clothes in a box he'd never had the heart to throw away. A pair of pajamas that would swallow Emma whole, but they were clean and warm. He hesitated for a moment, the painful memories those small clothes carried, then pushed the emotion aside. David would have wanted his things to help another child. "Emma," he said softly, kneeling beside the couch, "I need you to change into these dry clothes." "Okay, the bathroom's right through that door." Emma's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she looked confused, almost panicked. Then she saw Jake's kind face in the firelight, and some of the tension left her small shoulders. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're safe," Jake said simply. "This is my house. We're going to get you warm and fed, and then we'll figure out how to get you back to your family." Emma sat up slowly, wincing as if she were sore. Jake noticed a small cut on her forehead that he'd missed earlier, partially hidden by her dark hair. "Emma, sweetheart, how did you get hurt?" he asked gently. She touched the cut automatically, then looked away. "I don't remember," she said, but something in her tone suggested she remembered more than she was willing to say. Jake didn't press. Whatever had happened to this child, she'd been through enough trauma for one night. He helped her to the bathroom, gave her privacy to change, then settled her back on the couch with a mug of hot chocolate and a grilled cheese sandwich. While Emma ate slowly, carefully, as if she wasn't sure the food wouldn't be taken away, Jake tried his landline. The phone service was working, and he dialed the Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department. "Sheriff's office," came the gravelly voice of Deputy Frank Kowalski. "Frank, it's Jake Morrison. I found a lost child on Highway 9 during the storm. Little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Says her name is Emma." A pause. "Jesus, Jake. A kid in this weather. She okay?" "Physically, she seems fine. Scared, though. Real scared. Any missing person reports come in tonight. Not a one. And trust me, if a kid this age went missing, we'd know about it. Parents would be calling every 5 minutes." Jake glanced at Emma, who was watching him with those two serious dark eyes. "That's what's bothering me, Frank. She's clearly from money-expensive clothes, well cared for. Not the kind of kid whose disappearance goes unnoticed. You want me to come out there?" Jake considered it. The storm was still raging outside, and Emma had just started to relax. The last thing she needed was more strangers and official questions. "Give me until morning," Jake said. "If no one's reported her missing by then, we'll figure out our next move." After he hung up, Jake found Emma curled up on the couch, the oversized pajamas making her look even smaller. She'd finished most of the sandwich and hot chocolate, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "Feeling better?" he asked, settling into the armchair across from her. Emma nodded, then surprised him by speaking. "My mommy's going to be worried." "I bet she is, sweetheart. Can you tell me your mommy's name? Or your last name? That would help us find her." Emma's face scrunched up in concentration, as if she were trying to remember something just out of reach. I think it starts with an H. Harrison Henderson." She shook her head in frustration. "I can't remember." Jake's heart went out to her. Head trauma could cause memory issues, and that cut on her forehead suggested she'd hit her head on something. "That's okay," he said gently. "Sometimes when we get scared or hurt, our memories get a little fuzzy. They'll come back." Emma looked around the cabin, taking in the rustic decor, the photographs on the mantel. Her gaze lingered on a picture of Jake and David fishing at the lake. "Is that your little boy?" she asked. Jake's throat tightened. "Yeah, that's David." "Where is he?" The innocent question hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd been asked this question dozens of times over the past 3 years, but somehow, hearing it from this lost little girl made it fresh again. He's not with us anymore," Jake said carefully. Emma's face grew solemn with the kind of understanding that children shouldn't possess. "My daddy's not with us anymore either," she said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling and the storm raging outside. Two souls who'd lost pieces of themselves, finding unexpected companionship in shared grief. Eventually, Emma's eyelids began to droop. Jake carried her to David's old room, tucking her into the twin bed that had sat empty for too long. As he pulled the covers up to her chin, Emma caught his hand. "Jake," she whispered. "Yeah, sweetheart. Thank you for finding me." Jake's chest constricted with emotion. "Thank you for letting me help you." As he watched her drift off to sleep, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than a lost child. Emma's expensive clothes, her vague memories, the fact that no one had reported her missing at all pointed to something bigger, something darker. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but Jake didn't think the real tempest had even begun yet. Jake woke at dawn to the sound of silence. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind the kind of crystalline quiet that only comes after nature has exhausted its fury. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin windows, casting everything in soft grays and golds. He checked on Emma first. She was still asleep, curled into a tight ball under David's old Star Wars comforter. Her dark hair spread across the pillow. In sleep, she looked even younger, more vulnerable. Jake found himself wondering again what kind of hell this child had endured. Coffee. He needed coffee and then some answers. As the rich aroma filled the kitchen, Jake's landline rang. He grabbed it before the second ring, not wanting to wake Emma. "Jake, it's Frank. Any word on the kid's family?" "Nothing yet. She's still asleep." Jake cradled the phone against his shoulder while he poured his coffee. Any missing person reports come in overnight. That's the weird thing. No, I've checked with the state police, surrounding counties, even put out some feelers with the FBI's missing children database. Nothing matches our girl. Jake's grip tightened on his mug. That's not possible. Frank, kids like this don't just fall through the cracks. I know it, which is why I'm heading over there this morning. We need to get some official statements. Maybe see if she remembers anything else. Go easy, Frank. She's been through enough. You know me better than that. Jake. After he hung up, Jake stood at the kitchen window, watching the morning mist rise from the pine trees. His construction crew wouldn't be working today, too much standing water from the storm, which meant he could focus on Emma, on figuring out where she belonged. Jake. He turned to find Emma standing in the kitchen doorway, swimming in David's old pajamas. Her hair was tousled from sleep, but her dark eyes were alert, watchful. Morning, sweetheart. How'd you sleep? Okay. She patted across the floor on bare feet. I had dreams, but I can't remember them. Jake poured a glass of orange juice and set it on the table. Sometimes that's for the best. You hungry? I make pretty mean pancakes. Emma's face lit up, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Really, my daddy used to make pancakes. He put chocolate chips in them. Your daddy sounds like a smart man. Chocolate chip pancakes. Coming right up. As Jake mixed the batter, Emma climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs, her legs swinging freely. She seemed more relaxed this morning, more like the child she should be. Emma, Jake said carefully, can you remember anything else about yesterday, about how you ended up by the road? Emma's smile faded, and she stared down at her juice glass. There was a car, she said slowly, a big black car, and there were men, angry men. Jake's blood chilled. Were these men trying to hurt you? I don't know. Everything's fuzzy, like trying to remember a movie you saw a long time ago. She looked up at him with those enormous dark eyes. But I remember being scared. Really, really scared. Before Jake could ask another question, the sound of gravel crunching under tires announced Frank's arrival. Emma's whole body tensed, and she slid lower in her chair. It's okay, Jake said quickly. That's just Sheriff Frank. He's a friend, and he's here to help us find your family. But Emma didn't look convinced. If anything, she looked terrified. Frank Kowalski was a good man. Jake had known him for 15 years. Since Frank had moved to Pine Ridge from Chicago, burned out from big city policing. He was in his 50s now, with graying hair and kind blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When he entered the kitchen, he made sure to crouch down to Emma's level. Hi there. Emma, I'm Sheriff Frank. Jake here tells me you had quite an adventure yesterday. Emma pressed closer to Jake's side, her small hand gripping his shirt. She nodded but didn't speak. Frank's expression grew concerned as he took in her obvious fear. Emma, I want you to know that you're safe here. Jake's one of the good guys, and so am I. We just want to help you get back to your family. What if... Emma's voice was barely a whisper. What if they don't want me back? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Jake felt his heart break a little more for this frightened child who somehow believed she might not be wanted. Oh, sweetheart, Frank said gently. I promise you, somewhere out there, people are looking for you. People who love you very much. But even as he said it, Jake caught the doubt in Frank's eyes. Because what kind of people who loved a child very much wouldn't report her missing over breakfast? Frank tried to ask Emma gentle questions about her family, where she lived, what she remembered, but her answers were frustratingly vague fragments of memory that didn't quite connect into a coherent picture. She remembered a big house with lots of windows. She remembered a woman with blonde hair who sang to her. She remembered feeling safe, then suddenly not safe at all. But names, locations, concrete details remained just out of reach. Could be trauma-induced amnesia, Frank murmured to Jake while Emma was in the bathroom. Kids' minds sometimes protect them by blocking out bad memories. Or someone made sure she couldn't remember. Jake said grimly. Frank's eyebrows rose. That's a hell of an accusation. Jake, look at her. Frank, look at those clothes. That cut on her head. This isn't some custody dispute gone wrong. This feels like something much bigger. Before Frank could respond, a black sedan pulled into Jake's driveway. Both men tensed. Unmarked cars usually meant trouble in their experience. Two men in dark suits climbed out, their movements precise and professional. Federal agents, Jake thought immediately. But what would the feds want with a lost little girl? Gentlemen, the taller agent said as he approached the porch. He was middle-aged, with steel gray hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. I'm Agent Mitchell, FBI. This is Agent Torres. We understand you have a child here who matches the description of someone we're looking for. Frank stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his service weapon. And who might that be? Agent Mitchell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Emma Catherine Sinclair, daughter of Victoria Sinclair. She was taken from her home 3 days ago. Jake felt the world tilt slightly. Sinclair. He knew that name. Everyone in America knew that name. Victoria Sinclair, the pharmaceutical heiress, one of the wealthiest women in the country. But if Emma was her daughter... Where are your credentials? Frank demanded. Mitchell reached into his jacket, but instead of pulling out a badge, he produced a photograph. It showed Emma. There was no doubt it was her, but she was dressed in an expensive blue dress, standing next to a woman with blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. Emma's been missing for 3 days, Mitchell continued. Her mother is desperate to get her back. We just need to collect her and return her to her family. Something felt wrong to Jake. These men were too calm, too controlled for agents dealing with a kidnapped child. And Emma's reaction when she saw them through the window, pure, primal terror, told him everything he needed to know. Emma, Jake called softly. Can you come here for a minute? When Emma appeared, her face went white as snow. She stumbled backward, shaking her head frantically. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Those are the bad men. The ones from the car. Agent Mitchell's facade slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and dangerous underneath. The child is confused, traumatized. She needs professional help that only her family can provide. Funny thing, Frank said, his voice deceptively casual. I've been in contact with federal databases all morning. No missing person report for any Emma Sinclair. You'd think if the daughter of one of America's wealthiest women was kidnapped, that might make the news. Mitchell's jaw tightened. This is a sensitive family matter. Media attention would only complicate the child's recovery. Jake stepped protectively in front of Emma, who was now clinging to his leg like a lifeline. I think you gentlemen should leave. Now. I'm afraid we can't do that, Mitchell said, and suddenly there was a gun in his hand. The child comes with us? This doesn't have to get ugly. But it was already ugly, because Jake Morrison wasn't about to let anyone take Emma, not when she was this terrified, not when every instinct he possessed was screaming that these men meant her harm. Frank, Jake said quietly, never taking his eyes off Mitchell. Get Emma out of here. Already on it, Frank replied, his own weapon now drawn. What happened next would change everything, because sometimes protecting an innocent child means standing against people who wear badges and claim to represent justice. Sometimes doing the right thing means becoming a fugitive. And sometimes the storm outside is nothing compared to the one about to engulf your life. The standoff lasted exactly 47 seconds, but to Jake, it felt like hours. Agent Mitchell's gun remained trained on him while Frank had his service weapon pointed at Mitchell's partner. Emma cowered behind Jake's legs, her small body trembling with terror. This doesn't have to escalate, Mitchell said, his voice remaining eerily calm. Just hand over the child, and everyone walks away. Over my dead body, Jake growled. Mitchell's smile was razor thin. That can be arranged. Frank's radio crackled to life. Sheriff, we've got reports of suspicious vehicles on Highway 9. Locals are saying they look like a convoy. Jake's blood ran cold. More of them. This wasn't just about two rogue agents. This was organized, planned, military precise. How many vehicles? Dispatch, Frank asked, never taking his eyes off Agent Torres. At least 6. Sheriff, black SUVs, moving fast. Mitchell's smile widened. You have about 3 minutes to reconsider your position. Gentlemen, my colleagues can be less diplomatic than I am. Jake's mind raced. The cabin was isolated, but that isolation also meant limited escape routes. The main road was the only way out by vehicle, and if it was blocked by a convoy of SUVs, they'd be trapped. But Jake knew these mountains better than any outsider ever could. He'd hunted and hiked every trail, explored every abandoned logging road. If they could get to his ATV, Frank, he said quietly, remember the old mining trail that connects to Bear Creek Road? Frank's eyes flicked to Jake's for just a moment. The one that's been washed out for years. Not anymore? I've been using it to get my ATV up to the hunting cabin. Think it'll hold your truck? Only one way to find out. Jake could hear the distant rumble of engines now, getting closer. Whatever they were going to do, they had to do it fast. Emma, Jake whispered, crouching down to her level while keeping his eyes on Mitchell. Remember when we talked about adventure stories about brave kids who had to be very quiet and very fast? Emma nodded, her dark eyes wide but focused. This is our adventure story. When I say go, you run to the back door as fast as you can. Don't look back. Don't stop. Can you do that for me? I'm scared, she whispered. I know, sweetheart, but sometimes being brave means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. The sound of engines was getting louder. Through the front window, Jake could see dust clouds on the access road. Time's up, Mitchell announced, raising his weapon. Last chance. Jake looked at Frank, saw the grim determination in his old friend's eyes. They both knew how this was going to end. Frank was a good cop, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. This was going to get ugly. Go, Jake shouted. Everything happened at once. Emma bolted for the back door with the speed that only terrified children possess. Frank dove behind the kitchen counter as gunfire erupted. Jake rolled toward the fireplace, grabbing the loaded hunting rifle he kept mounted above the mantel. Bullets splintered the log walls and shattered windows. Jake could hear Emma's feet pounding across the back porch, and he prayed she remembered his instructions about the trail through the woods. Mitchell was advancing through the living room, his weapon trained on Jake's position. Jake waited until the man was committed to his approach, then popped up from behind the stone hearth. The hunting rifle boomed, and Mitchell went down hard. Jake! Frank's voice was tight with pain. I'm hit! Jake low-crawled across the floor to where Frank was pressed against the kitchen cabinets, blood seeping through his uniform shirt at the shoulder. How bad? Jake asked, quickly assessing the wound. I'll live, but those engines are getting closer, and Torres called for backup before I put him down. Through the broken front window, Jake could see the first of the black SUVs cresting the hill. 4 vehicles, maybe 5. Professional operators with military-grade equipment, all coming for one little girl. Why? Jake muttered. Why is she so important? Questions later. Frank grunted, struggling to his feet. Survival now. You still got that ATV. In the shed out back. But Frank, you're in no condition to... I'm not going anywhere. Frank interrupted. My job is to protect and serve. And right now, that means buying you and Emma time to get away. Jake felt his throat tighten. Frank, no. There's got to be another way. There is no other way. These aren't cops. Jake, there's something else. Something dirty. That little girl trusted you to keep her safe, and that's exactly what you're going to do. The SUVs were pulling into the driveway now, disgorging men in tactical gear. Frank checked his remaining ammunition and gave Jake a grim smile. Tell you what, if I make it out of this, first beer's on you. When you make it out of this, Jake corrected. He clasped Frank's good shoulder, then duck walked toward the back door. Behind him, He could hear Frank repositioning, getting ready for a fight he couldn't possibly win. Jake found Emma huddled behind his woodshed, exactly where he'd told her to hide. She was shaking like a leaf, but she wasn't crying. Brave kid. "Ready for the next part of our adventure?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain calm. Emma nodded, and Jake led her to the ATV. It was an older model, but reliable and powerful enough to navigate the treacherous mountain trails. He'd modified it over the years, adding a cargo rack and upgrading the suspension for his hunting trips. As he kick-started the engine, gunfire erupted from the cabin. Frank was making his stand, giving them the precious minutes they needed to escape. Jake helped Emma onto the ATV behind him. "Hold on tight, sweetheart. This is going to be a bumpy ride." The old mining trail was exactly as treacherous as Jake remembered. Narrow, rocky, with a sheer drop on one side and loose scree on the other. But the ATV's knobby tires found purchase on the weathered stone, and Jake's years of experience navigating these mountains paid off. Behind them, the gunfire had stopped. Jake tried not to think about what that meant for Frank. They climbed steadily through the pine forest, following a path that most people didn't even know existed. The air grew thinner and colder as they gained elevation, and Emma pressed closer against Jake's back, her small arms wrapped tightly around his waist. After 30 minutes of hard riding, they reached Bear Creek Road, a paved two-lane highway that connected to the interstate system. Jake pulled the ATV into a grove of aspen trees and cut the engine. "Okay," he said, helping Emma down. "Now we need to figure out what we're running from and why." Emma looked up at him with those serious dark eyes. "They want to take me back to my grandfather," she said quietly. "Your grandfather, I thought Agent Mitchell said your mother was looking for you." Emma shook her head. "Mommy tried to take me away from grandfather, but he found us. He always finds us." A chill ran down Jake's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Emma, what's your grandfather's name?" "Howard Sinclair," she whispered, and suddenly everything made a terrible kind of sense. Howard Sinclair, not just wealthy, powerful beyond imagination, the kind of man who could make people disappear, who could corrupt federal agents, who could turn the entire system against anyone who stood in his way. And Jake Morrison, a simple construction worker from Pine Ridge, had just made an enemy of one of the most dangerous men in America. But as he looked down at Emma's frightened face, Jake knew he'd made the right choice. Because some things were more important than survival. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. "All right, sweetheart," he said, picking her up and settling her back on the ATV. "Let's go find your mommy." The real adventure was just beginning. Victoria Sinclair woke up in a private hospital room with the kind of disorientation that comes from having your world turned upside down. The last thing she remembered clearly was the argument with her father, the desperate decision to run with Emma. And then, nothing. Just fragments, rain, headlights, the sickening crunch of metal against tree. A man in an expensive suit sat in the chair beside her bed, his face carefully composed into an expression of concern. Richard Hawthorne, her father's attorney and chief enforcer. The sight of him sent ice through her veins. "Victoria," he said smoothly, "thank God you're awake. You've been unconscious for 2 days." "Where's Emma?" The words came out as a croak, her throat raw and dry. "She's safe," Richard replied, but something in his tone made Victoria's maternal instincts scream danger. "Your father has made sure she's being well cared for." Victoria tried to sit up, but pain shot through her ribs and head. "I want to see her. Now." "I'm afraid that's not possible. The doctors say you suffered a severe concussion. You need rest." "Don't." Victoria's voice hardened to steel. "Don't you dare patronize me. Richard, where is my daughter?" Richard's mask slipped slightly, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "There was an incident. After your accident, Emma wandered away from the crash site. She was found by some locals in a town called Pine Ridge." Victoria's blood turned to ice. "What kind of incident?" "The situation has been handled," Richard said carefully. Your father's people are bringing her home as we speak. But Victoria had known Richard Hawthorne for 15 years. She could read the tells, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed against his briefcase. He was lying. What really happened? Richard, before he could answer, Victoria's phone buzzed on the bedside table. Richard moved to intercept it, but Victoria was faster, her hand closing around the device despite the pain in her ribs. The text message was from an unknown number. Your daughter is safe. The men who came for her were not FBI. If you want to see Emma again, come alone to Bear Creek Road, mile marker 47. Come now. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. Someone had Emma, someone who wasn't working for her father. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Who was that? Richard demanded. Nobody important, Victoria lied, deleting the message. I need to rest now. Richard's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. Of course. I'll be right outside if you need anything. The moment he left the room, Victoria was moving. Her body screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. She'd been ignoring her father's control for years. She could ignore a few broken ribs. Her clothes were in the closet, along with her purse and car keys. Victoria dressed quickly, her mind already working through the logistics. Mile marker 47 on Bear Creek Road was about 2 hours from the hospital, deep in the Colorado mountains. Isolated, perfect for an ambush, or perfect for a secret meeting. She was betting on the latter, because the alternative that Emma was in the hands of kidnappers or worse was too horrible to contemplate. Victoria had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was telling her that the mysterious text sender was the only person standing between Emma and her grandfather's web of corruption. She slipped out of the hospital through a service entrance, her heart pounding as she made her way to the parking garage. Richard's men would be watching the main exits, but Victoria had spent years planning for the day she might need to disappear. Her Porsche Cayenne was fast and reliable, perfect for mountain driving. As she pulled out of the garage, Victoria caught a glimpse of one of her father's security men in her rearview mirror, but she was already moving, already committed to the most important drive of her life. The 2 hours to Bear Creek Road felt like an eternity. Victoria's mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, worst-case outcomes. Who would risk confronting Howard Sinclair's people? Who would be brave enough or foolish enough to get between a billionaire and his granddaughter? Mile marker 47 turned out to be a scenic overlook with a small parking area surrounded by towering pines. Victoria's heart sank when she saw it was empty. But then movement in the tree line caught her eye. A man emerged from the forest, carrying Emma in his arms. Victoria's breath caught. Her daughter was alive, appeared unharmed, and was clinging to this stranger with a trust that spoke volumes. Victoria climbed out of her car slowly, her hands visible, her movements non-threatening. The man, tall, weathered, with kind eyes and calloused hands, watched her carefully. Emma, Victoria called softly. Her daughter's head turned, and their eyes met across the clearing. Mommy, Emma cried, struggling to get down. The man who had to be the one who sent the text set Emma on her feet, and she ran to Victoria with the desperation of a child who'd been separated from everything safe and familiar. Victoria dropped to her knees, ignoring the pain in her ribs as Emma crashed into her arms. She held her daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her small body. I thought I'd lost you, Victoria whispered. The bad men came, Emma said, her voice muffled against Victoria's shoulder. But Jake saved me, and Sheriff Frank. They fought the bad men. Victoria looked up at the man Jake with new understanding. You're the one who found her. Jake nodded. On Highway 9 during the storm. She was alone, scared. I couldn't just leave her. The men who came for her, Victoria said, standing slowly with Emma still in her arms. They weren't really FBI, were they? No. They were working for someone with a lot of money and even more power. Someone who doesn't like being told no. Victoria's jaw tightened. Her father. It had to be. Howard Sinclair had spent decades building an empire on the principle that everything and everyone had a price. The idea that a small-town construction worker would stand against him must have been incomprehensible. "I'm sorry," she said, looking Jake in the eye. "I'm sorry my family's problems put you in danger." Jake's expression softened slightly. "Emma's not a problem. She's a little girl who deserves to be safe." "Yes, she does." Victoria's voice hardened with resolve. "Which is why we can't stay here. My father will keep coming. He'll never stop until he has Emma back under his control." "Then we run," Jake said simply. Victoria blinked. "We? You think I'm just going to hand her over and walk away after what I've seen, after what they did to Frank?" Jake's voice was rough with emotion. "Your father's people tried to kill a good man today, a sheriff who was just doing his job. This isn't over for me." Victoria studied this man who had risked everything for a stranger's child. In her world of boardrooms and power plays, she'd learned to read people quickly and accurately. Jake Morrison was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man who'd found himself in an impossible situation and chosen to do the right thing. "You don't understand what you're getting into," she said quietly. "My father isn't just wealthy, he's dangerous. He has connections in law enforcement, government, corporate America. He can make people disappear." "Yeah?" Jake's smile was grim. "Well, I know these mountains better than any of his city boys, and I've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" Jake looked down at Emma, who was watching their conversation with those two serious dark eyes. "I've got nothing left to lose." The truth of that statement hit Victoria like a physical blow. She saw it now, in the way Jake carried himself, in the careful emptiness behind his kindness. This was a man who'd already lost everything that mattered to him, which made him the most dangerous kind of enemy. Howard Sinclair could face someone who couldn't be bought, threatened, or controlled. "There's something else," Victoria said, making a decision that would change all their lives. "Something you need to know about why my father wants Emma so badly." Jake waited, his expression alert. "My father's company, Sinclair Pharmaceuticals, has been developing something called the Genesis Project. Gene therapy technology that could be worth hundreds of billions of dollars, but it needs a specific genetic marker to work properly." Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes. Emma carries the marker. She's not just my father's granddaughter. She's the key to his greatest scientific achievement. Without her genetic material, the project is worthless." Jake's face went white. "He wants to use her as a lab rat. He wants to own her, control every aspect of her life, her future, her children's futures. She'll never be free." The weight of that revelation settled over them like a shroud. This wasn't just about family control or custody disputes. This was about turning a little girl into a commodity, a biological resource to be harvested and managed. "Over my dead body," Jake said quietly. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone in this fight. "Then we disappear. All of us. We find somewhere he can't reach us, and we stay hidden until we can figure out how to stop him permanently." Jake nodded. "I know a place. Off the grid. Secure. But Victoria..." "Yes. This isn't just about running anymore. Your father crossed a line when he sent those men after Emma. He tried to kill a sheriff, terrorized a child, corrupted federal agents. Someone needs to hold him accountable." Victoria looked down at Emma, then back at Jake. In her daughter's eyes, she saw trust. In Jake's, she saw determination. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she saw a path forward that didn't involve surrender. "You're right," she said. "It's time to fight back." The abandoned fire lookout tower stood sentinel on Copper Mountain's highest peak, its weathered wooden structure barely visible through the dense canopy of pine and aspen. Jake had discovered it years ago during a hunting trip, a forgotten relic from the days when forest fires were spotted by human eyes rather than satellite imagery. It was perfect for their needs, isolated, defensible, and completely off any official maps. The climb to reach it was treacherous, requiring them to abandon Victoria's Porsche at the base of an old logging road and hike the final 3 miles on foot. Emma rode piggyback on Jake's shoulders for most of the journey, her small hands gripping his hair as they navigated fallen logs and loose scree. "Almost there, kiddo," Jake said, feeling the burn in his legs as they approached the final switchback. Behind them, Victoria moved with determination despite her injuries, proving she was tougher than her privileged background might suggest. The tower itself was a 2-story structure built from massive pine logs, with an observation deck on top that provided a commanding view of the surrounding mountains. Jake had spent several weekends over the past year repairing the roof and reinforcing the structure, turning it into a functional hunting cabin. "It's not exactly the Ritz," he said as he helped Victoria up the ladder to the main level. "It's perfect," Victoria replied, looking around the sparse but clean interior. There was a wood-burning stove, several cots with sleeping bags, and enough supplies to last a week. "How did you find this place?" "Used to bring my son here," Jake said quietly, setting Emma down on one of the cots. "David loved the idea of living in a real tower, like a knight in a castle." Emma perked up at this. Was David a knight? Jake's throat tightened. "He was the bravest knight I ever knew." Victoria caught the pain in his voice and gently redirected Emma's attention to the window. "Look at that view. Sweetheart, you can see for miles." While Emma pressed her nose against the glass, marveling at the panoramic vista, Victoria pulled Jake aside. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "About your son." Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. Even 3 years later, talking about David was like picking at a wound that refused to heal. "How did he—" Victoria stopped herself. "I'm sorry. That's not my business." "Leukemia," Jake said simply. "Fought it for 2 years. Bravest kid you ever saw. Right up to the end." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I can't imagine." "The worst part wasn't losing him," Jake continued, surprised by his own need to share this with someone who might understand. "The worst part was feeling helpless, watching him suffer and not being able to fix it, not being able to protect him." He looked at Emma, who was now trying to count the peaks visible from the window. "Maybe that's why I couldn't walk away from her. Finally, here was a child I could actually protect." Victoria touched his arm gently. "David would be proud of you." Before Jake could respond, Emma called out from the window. "Jake, there are cars down there. Black cars." Jake's blood chilled. He moved to the window and pulled out a pair of binoculars he kept in the tower. Far below, winding up the logging road, were 3 black SUVs moving in formation. "Shit," he muttered, then glanced at Emma. "Sorry, kiddo." Victoria was already moving, checking the tower's other windows. "How did they find us so fast?" Jake thought quickly. "Your car must have a GPS tracker." He cursed himself for not thinking of it earlier. Of course Howard Sinclair would track his daughter's movements. "How long do we have?" Victoria asked. Jake studied the vehicles through the binoculars. They were moving slowly, carefully navigating the rough road. 20 minutes, maybe 30 if they stopped to search the car. "Is there another way down?" "There's a rappelling route on the north face, but it's technical climbing. I don't know if Emma could handle it." Emma appeared at his elbow. "I'm a good climber," she said seriously. "Daddy taught me at the rock gym." Jake looked down at her determined little face and made a decision. "Okay, but we do this my way. No questions. No hesitation. Can you do that?" Emma nodded solemnly. Jake moved quickly, gathering climbing gear from a storage locker. Ropes, harnesses, carabiners equipment he'd accumulated over years of mountain rescue work. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, setting up the rappelling anchor while Victoria helped Emma into a climbing harness. "Victoria," Jake said as he worked, "I need you to understand something. Once we go down that cliff, we're committed. No going back, no changing our minds. Your father's people will know we were here, and they'll be watching for us." "I understand." "No, I don't think you do." Jake stopped working and looked at her directly. "This means giving up your life as Victoria Sinclair. Your money, your property, your identity, all of it becomes a liability. We'll have to disappear completely. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Emma, who was testing her harness with the seriousness of a professional climber. I've been Howard Sinclair's daughter for 34 years, she said finally. I think it's time I found out who Victoria Morrison might be. Jake's hand stilled on the rope. Morrison, Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. Well, we're going to need new identities, aren't we? I figure if we're in this together, we might as well make it official. The sound of car doors slamming echoed up from the base of the mountain. They were out of time. Jake tested the anchor one final time, then helped Emma into position. Remember what I taught you about rappelling? Kiddo, slow and steady. Keep your feet against the rock. I remember, Emma said, her small face set with concentration. Jake went first, his body blocking Emma's view of the dizzying drop below. The north face of Copper Mountain was a sheer granite wall, polished, smooth by millennia of weather. One mistake would mean a 100-foot fall onto jagged rocks. But Emma was as good as her word. She descended the cliff face with the fearless grace that only children possess, her small hands sure on the rope, her feet finding purchase on tiny ledges that most adults would miss. Victoria followed, moving more slowly due to her injuries but never faltering. Jake could hear voices from the tower above now they'd found their hiding place. The bottom of the cliff opened onto a narrow canyon that led to an old mining trail. Jake had used this route before to approach the tower from an unexpected direction, and he was betting that Howard Sinclair's men wouldn't know it existed. They moved quickly through the canyon, Emma between Jake and Victoria, their footsteps muffled by decades of fallen pine needles. Behind them, the tower was suddenly blazing with light searchlights and flashlights as the pursuit team tried to figure out where their quarry had gone. Where are we going? Victoria whispered as they reached the end of the canyon. Jake pointed to a barely visible trail that wound along the mountainside. There's an old mining camp about 5 miles from here, completely abandoned, but there's still a radio antenna that might work. Radio. To contact someone who can help us. Someone your father can't buy or threaten? Victoria looked skeptical. In my experience, everyone has a price. Jake's smile was grim. Not everyone. You're about to meet some people who specialize in making the powerful answer for their crimes. As they started down the trail, Emma tugging on Jake's hand with the resilience that children showed in crisis, none of them knew that their decision to fight back was about to trigger a chain of events that would expose one of the largest conspiracies in corporate America. Because Howard Sinclair had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the power of a good man who had nothing left to lose, a mother's love for her child, and a little girl brave enough to trust both of them with her life. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The abandoned Copper Creek mining camp looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. Rusted equipment lay scattered across the clearing, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The main buildings had collapsed decades ago, leaving only concrete foundations and twisted metal beams pointing accusingly at the sky. But Jake knew something that most people didn't. One of the smaller buildings was still structurally sound, and more importantly, it still had power. How is there electricity out here? Victoria asked as Jake led them to what looked like a maintenance shed. Solar panels, Jake explained, pointing to barely visible photovoltaic cells mounted on the roof. Part of an environmental monitoring system that the Forest Service installed and then forgot about. Inside the shed, hidden beneath a camouflage tarp, was Jake's emergency cache, communications equipment, medical supplies, weapons, and enough food for several days. He'd been preparing for this kind of situation for years, ever since he learned some uncomfortable truths about the people who really ran America. Jake, Victoria said, watching him uncover a sophisticated radio setup. Who exactly are you? Jake paused, his hands on the radio controls. He'd known this question would come eventually. I told you I'm a construction worker. Construction workers don't usually have military-grade communication equipment hidden in abandoned mines. Emma had found a sleeping bag and was curled up in the corner, exhaustion finally overtaking her adrenaline. Jake waited until he was sure she was asleep before answering. "I wasn't always a construction worker," he said quietly. "Before David got sick, before my life fell apart, I was Army intelligence. 20 years in, specializing in exposing corruption and war profiteering." Victoria's eyes widened. "You were investigating people like my father. People exactly like your father. Military contractors who sold defective equipment to troops overseas. Defense manufacturers who bribed Pentagon officials for no-bid contracts. Corporate executives who got rich while soldiers died using their substandard gear." Jake's voice hardened as he spoke. The old anger was still there, buried beneath layers of grief and resignation, but never truly gone. "What happened?" Victoria asked softly. "I got too close to something big. A conspiracy that reached all the way to the top of the defense establishment. They couldn't discredit me directly. I was too careful. Had too much evidence. So they went after David instead." Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Jake's hands clenched into fists. "David's leukemia wasn't random. It was caused by exposure to experimental chemicals that had been dumped near our base housing. Chemicals from a company that was supposed to be safely disposing of military waste, but was actually just burying it in the ground." "Oh my God!" "The company was owned by a subsidiary of a defense contractor I'd been investigating. When I started asking questions about the connection, suddenly my security clearance was revoked. I was transferred to a dead-end desk job." The investigation was shut down. Jake turned to the radio, his voice barely above a whisper. "By the time I figured out what they'd done, David was already sick, and by the time I could prove it, he was dead." Victoria felt tears burning her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I resigned from the Army, moved to Pine Ridge to get away from it all. Told myself I was done fighting battles I couldn't win." Jake looked at Emma's sleeping form. "But then I found her, and I realized some battles are worth fighting even when you know you're going to lose." Jake turned on the radio and began adjusting frequencies. Static filled the small shed, punctuated by brief snippets of distant voices. He worked methodically, searching for a specific signal. "Who are we calling?" Victoria asked. "Someone who's been fighting the same war I gave up on. Someone who believes that the powerful should answer for their crimes, no matter how untouchable they think they are." The static cleared suddenly, and a woman's voice came through with crystal clarity. "Copper Creek, this is Lighthouse. Jake, is that you?" Jake picked up the microphone. "Hello. Sarah, I need a favor." "Jesus. Jake, we've been monitoring law enforcement frequencies all day. Half the federal agencies in Colorado are looking for you. What the hell did you step in? The Howard Sinclair kind of hell?" A long pause, and then, "Ah, shit. Jake, tell me you didn't take on the Sinclair family." "I didn't have a choice. They were trying to kidnap a little girl." "Emma Catherine Sinclair?" "Yeah, we know about her. We've been tracking Sinclair's Genesis project for months. That little girl is the key to the biggest biotech theft in history." Victoria leaned closer to the radio. "This is Victoria Sinclair. Who am I talking to?" Another pause. Well, the prodigal daughter. This is Sarah Chen, investigative journalist for the Washington Herald. I've been trying to get an interview with you for 2 years. About what? About your father's illegal genetic experiments? About the Genesis project? About the fact that he's been using his pharmaceutical company as a front for some of the most unethical research in modern history?" Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What are you talking about? You don't know, do you?" Sarah's voice was full of sympathy. "Victoria, your father hasn't just been developing gene therapy. He's been stealing genetic material from patients, conducting unauthorized experiments on terminal children, and covering up dozens of deaths that resulted from his research." "That's impossible." "I have the documents, medical records, financial transactions, email communications between your father and his research teams. The Genesis project isn't just about creating new treatments. It's about creating a genetic database that would give Sinclair Pharmaceuticals control over human evolution itself. Victoria's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor. Her father, cold and controlling as he was, couldn't possibly be capable of such monstrous acts. The reason he wants Emma so badly, Sarah continued, isn't just because she carries the right genetic markers. It's because she's the only successful subject of his early experiments. He's been dosing her with experimental compounds since she was born, turning her into a living laboratory. No, Victoria whispered. No, that's not. I would have known. Would you think about it, Victoria? How many times has Emma been sick with mysterious symptoms that cleared up after visits to your father's private medical facility? How many vaccines and vitamin shots has she received that weren't standard pediatric care? Victoria's mind raced back through Emma's medical history. The frequent visits to grandfather's special doctors, the unusual blood tests, the way Emma sometimes seemed sluggish and confused after spending time at the Sinclair compound. Oh God, she breathed. He's been experimenting on her. For years. And now that you've tried to remove her from his control, he's desperate to get her back. Not just for future experiments, but to cover up what he's already done. Emma is living evidence of his crimes. Jake took the microphone back. Sarah, we need extraction. Full witness protection for all three of us. I can't do that. Jake, not through official channels. Sinclair has people everywhere. FBI, DOJ, probably CIA. Going through the system would be suicide. Then what do you suggest? We go public. Full media exposure. Simultaneous release across multiple platforms. International coverage. Make it impossible for them to cover up or spin the story. Victoria stood up slowly, her face pale but determined. What do you need from me? Everything? Medical records, financial documents, anything that proves the connection between your father's company and the illegal experiments. But more than that, I need you to be willing to testify, to go on record with everything you know. I don't know enough. I've been kept out of the business side of things. Then we get you access. Jake, how do you feel about a little breaking and entering? Jake's smile was grim. Depends on what we're breaking into. Sinclair Pharmaceuticals' main research facility, Aurora, Colorado, 30 miles from your current position. If Victoria can get us inside, I can get the evidence we need to bring down the entire operation. Victoria looked at Emma, still sleeping peacefully in the corner. Her daughter, her innocent, trusting daughter, had been turned into a lab rat by her own grandfather. The thought filled Victoria with a rage so pure and focused, it was like looking into the heart of a star. When do we go? She asked. Tomorrow night. But Victoria, once we do this, there's no going back. Your father will know you betrayed him. He'll come after you with everything he has. Victoria's voice was steady as steel. Let him come. I'm done running. As Jake began coordinating the details with Sarah, none of them realized that their conversation was being monitored by sophisticated listening equipment positioned throughout the mountains. Howard Sinclair knew exactly where they were, exactly what they were planning, and he was already 3 moves ahead of them. The final game was about to begin. The Sinclair Pharmaceuticals research facility rose from the Colorado plains like a glass and steel monument to corporate ambition. Even at night, the building hummed with activity laboratories that never slept. Researchers working around the clock on projects that could reshape humanity itself. Jake crouched in the tall grass 500 yards from the main entrance, studying the building through night vision binoculars. Victoria lay beside him, her face tense with concentration as she pointed out security features and guard rotations. The main server room is on the 15th floor, she whispered, but we'll need my biometric signature to access it. What about backup security? Jake asked. Dad's paranoid. Motion sensors, pressure plates in the floors, facial recognition cameras. But there's a service elevator that goes directly to his private lab. If we can get there, I can access his personal files. Jake lowered the binoculars. Something felt wrong. The security seemed too light, the guards too relaxed. After everything that had happened in the past few days, Howard Sinclair should have his facility locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Victoria, are you sure about this? It feels like a trap. Victoria's jaw tightened. Of course it's a trap, but we don't have a choice. Emma's life depends on exposing what my father has done. They left Emma with Sarah Chen at a safe house in Denver, guarded by a team of investigative journalists and activists who specialized in protecting whistleblowers. It had been the hardest thing Victoria had ever done leaving her daughter again, but it was the only way to keep her safe. Jake checked his watch. Sarah's team is in position, standing by. The moment we upload the files, they'll simultaneously release the story to every major news outlet in the world. My father won't be able to suppress it. Jake nodded and started forward, but Victoria caught his arm. Jake, I need you to know something. If this goes wrong, if we don't make it out, we're making it out. But if we don't, I need you to promise me you'll take care of Emma. Not just keep her safe, really take care of her. Be the father she deserves. Jake met her eyes in the darkness. Over the past few days, he'd watched Victoria transform from a pampered heiress into a fierce protector, willing to sacrifice everything for her child. He'd also felt something growing between them, a connection forged in danger and shared purpose. I promise, he said, but you're going to be there to raise her yourself. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, using the shadows of landscaping and service vehicles to avoid the security cameras. Victoria's keycard still worked at the employee entrance. Apparently, her father was confident enough in his trap that he hadn't bothered to revoke her access. The building's interior was a maze of sterile corridors and laboratory spaces. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. Jake's military training kicked in, every sense alert for danger as they made their way to the service elevators. The private laboratory on the 20th floor was a monument to Howard Sinclair's ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains, while the walls were lined with awards, patents, and photographs of the man himself with various world leaders and celebrities. Victoria went directly to her father's computer terminal, her fingers flying over the keyboard. I'm in, she said, downloading everything: research files, financial records, communications with government officials. Jake watched the door while gigabytes of data flowed onto their portable drives. On the computer screen, he could see fragments of files with names like Genesis Protocol, Genetic Harvesting Initiative, and Subject E7, which he realized with horror was probably Emma. My God, Victoria breathed, staring at one of the files. Jake, look at this. The document was a research proposal titled Longitudinal Genetic Modification in Pediatric Subjects. It detailed a multi-year plan to introduce experimental genetic modifications into children, using their own families as unwitting test subjects. Emma's name appeared throughout the document, along with detailed medical data tracking her physical and mental development. There were references to enhanced cognitive function, improved disease resistance, and accelerated cellular regeneration. He's been turning her into some kind of super soldier, Jake said, his voice filled with disgust. It's worse than that, Victoria said, scrolling through more files. He's been preparing to harvest her genetic material for mass production. He was planning to clone her. A slow clap echoed through the laboratory. Both Jake and Victoria spun around to find Howard Sinclair standing in the doorway, flanked by 6 armed security personnel. Howard Sinclair was in his 70s but moved with the predatory grace of a much younger man. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, and his cold blue eyes, so much like Victoria's, held no warmth or paternal affection. My dear daughter, he said, his voice cultured and calm. I must admit, I'm impressed. I never thought you had the spine for something like this. Hello, Father, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the guns pointed at them. And you must be Mr. Morrison, the soldier who thinks he can wage war against an empire. Howard's smile was razor thin. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Jake stepped protectively in front of Victoria. Let her go. This is between you and me. Howard laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, my dear boy, This stopped being about you the moment you interfered with my property. Emma isn't property. She's a child. Emma is the most valuable genetic specimen on Earth. She represents decades of research, billions of dollars in development costs, and the future of human evolution itself. Howard's eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. Did you really think I would let a small-town carpenter steal that away from me? Victoria stood up slowly, her hands visible but defiant. She's my daughter, not your experiment. She stopped being your daughter the moment I began improving her. Every enhancement, every modification, every carefully controlled variable in her development, that's my work. My genius. You're simply the incubator I used to create perfection. Jake felt rage building in his chest. This man wasn't just a criminal, he was a monster who saw his own granddaughter as nothing more than laboratory equipment. The files are already uploading, Victoria said. In about 10 minutes. The whole world is going to know what kind of monster you really are. Howard glanced at his watch. Actually, my dear, those files have been uploading to my own servers for the past 5 minutes. Did you really think I wouldn't monitor access to my personal computer? Victoria's face went white. You knew we were coming. I've known your every move since you left the hospital. The touching rendezvous at Bear Creek Road, the dramatic escape from the tower, even your little hideout in the mining camp. I've been allowing you to run, letting you believe you were being clever. Jake's mind raced. If Howard had been tracking them all along, that meant... Emma, Jake breathed. Howard's smile widened. Is already back where she belongs. My people collected her from your journalist friend about an hour ago. Quite a spirited little thing. She actually tried to bite one of my security guards. Victoria let out a strangled cry and started toward her father, but the guards raised their weapons. Now, Howard said. Let's not do anything hasty. You see, I have a proposition for both of you. Go to hell, Jake snarled. Such hostility. And here I thought we might come to an arrangement. Howard moved to the windows, gazing out at the mountains. Victoria, you're going to return to your role as my daughter. You'll make a public statement about being kidnapped by Mr. Morrison here, how he manipulated and threatened you. The media will love the story of a heroic father rescuing his daughter from a dangerous criminal. I'll never, but you will, because if you don't, Emma's participation in the Genesis project will become significantly more invasive. Up until now, I've been quite gentle with her, but there are so many more experiments I could conduct, so many procedures that would advance science, even if they might be somewhat uncomfortable for the subject. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. Her father was threatening to torture Emma if she didn't cooperate. Jake saw the despair in Victoria's eyes and made a decision. In one fluid motion, he grabbed a heavy award from Howard's desk and hurled it through the floor-to-ceiling window. The glass exploded outward in a shower of crystalline fragments. Run! He shouted, grabbing Victoria's hand and pulling her toward the shattered window. The security guards opened fire, but Jake and Victoria were already moving. They leaped through the window just as the bullets shattered the air where they'd been standing. 20 stories above the ground, with no safety equipment and no plan except the desperate hope that they might somehow survive the fall. Jake Morrison and Victoria Sinclair committed themselves to the most dangerous gamble of their lives. Because sometimes, saving the people you love means risking everything, including your own life. The ground rushed up to meet them, and everything went black. The world came back to Jake in fragments. Pain. First and foremost, a symphony of agony that suggested multiple broken bones and internal injuries. Then awareness of movement, the rhythmic bouncing that meant he was in a vehicle. Finally, voices urgent, professional, definitely not belonging to Howard Sinclair's men. He's coming around, a woman's voice said. Jake, can you hear me? Jake tried to open his eyes, but even that simple action sent spikes of pain through his skull. Victoria, he croaked. She's alive, conscious. 3 broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, concussion, but she's going to make it. Jake finally managed to open his eyes and found himself looking at Sarah Chen. They were in the back of an ambulance, racing through the Denver streets with sirens wailing. How? Jake managed. Sarah's smile was grim. Industrial scaffolding. You fell into the construction rigging they had set up for building maintenance. Broke your fall just enough to keep you from becoming sidewalk pizza. Emma. Sarah's expression darkened. Still missing. But Jake, the files you uploaded before everything went to hell, we got them. All of them. The story broke about 30 minutes ago, simultaneously across 15 different news outlets. Jake tried to sit up, gasping as pain shot through his ribs. What's the reaction? Chaos. The FBI has raided Sinclair Pharmaceuticals. The SEC has frozen all of Howard's assets. There are protests outside every Sinclair facility in the country. Sarah handed him a tablet showing news coverage. Your little stunt exposed one of the biggest corporate conspiracies in American history. The headlines were damning. Pharmaceutical giant conducted illegal human experiments. Children used as lab rats in genetic research. Billionaire's granddaughter victim of corporate medical abuse. But Howard still has Emma, Jake said. Not for long. The FBI has teams moving on every property he owns. He's got nowhere to run. Victoria's voice came from the gurney next to him. You don't know my father. He's always got an escape plan. Jake turned to look at her. Victoria's face was bruised and bandaged, but her eyes burned with determination. Even after falling 20 stories and surviving a corporate conspiracy, she looked ready to keep fighting. The FBI will find her, Sarah said. No, they won't. Victoria struggled to sit up despite her injuries. My father has contingency plans for everything. Safe houses, private jets, countries with no extradition treaties. By the time the federal agents figure out where he's gone, Emma could be anywhere in the world. Jake felt despair clawing at his chest. They'd sacrificed everything to expose Howard Sinclair, and it still might not be enough to save Emma. There is one thing, Victoria said slowly. Something my father doesn't know I know about. Sarah leaned forward. What? When I was a child, my father had a private retreat in the mountains. A place where he took me when he wanted to discuss family business away from prying. In the end, it wasn't money that won the war. It wasn't power or connections or the machinery of corruption that decides most battles in this world. It was a construction worker who remembered what it meant to protect something precious, a mother who chose love over legacy, and a little girl brave enough to trust strangers who became family. The Sinclair empire fell not to government raids or federal investigations, but to the simple truth that some bonds can't be broken by greed. Some innocence is worth any sacrifice. They found each other in a storm, three souls battered by loss, searching for something real in a world of facades. What they discovered was that family isn't about blood or birth certificates. It's about the people who stay when the thunder rolls, the ones who fight when you can't fight anymore. Sometimes the greatest victories happen quietly, in places the world will never see. Sometimes healing comes not from forgetting the darkness, but from choosing to build something beautiful in spite of it. What would you risk to protect the innocent?